And we are now online for this session. The session is with an international finance institution expert. The expert is Naz. She's here with us today. So we're going to kickstart this 20-minute session. But before we do that, Naz, thank you so much for being here with us today. Would you be so kind and introduce yourself quickly? And from there, we'll kickstart the discussion. I think today we're going to talk about resilience, but let's see where this discussion leads us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Romain, for this kind invitation to this podcast. I work with urban stakeholders to inspire change towards a resilient world. And in my most recent role, I work with International Finance Corporation, which is a member of the World Bank Group, on a program called Building Resilience Index, where we try to inform the construction and building sector and help them, give them a framework and a tool that will enable them to assess location-specific risks of natural hazards, and give them technical tools to build more resilient buildings and be able to disclose the value of resilience and the status of their building across the whole stakeholders within the building sector.
Wow, that's a lot. So this is a super interesting topic, and I know now I5s in general are putting more and more initiative and money and financing on those topics. But just to make sure that the audience understand, and I understand, you're talking about the resilience of the building themselves, meaning that can lead to, I guess, retrofitting or improvement of the building as a shelf itself. Or you also talking about mapping resilience. Okay, if a building is in a certain zone, you have, as you say, risk vis-a-vis natural disaster, and you give to the building owners or different stakeholders that are in different zone information about the risk vis-a-vis the location. Or is it a mix of both? I would like to understand that better.
It's a mix of both. So for the Building Resilience Index program specifically, what we're doing is, because most of the time, the biggest challenge that the developers face is that they don't have access to information about what are the climate or natural hazard risks that are affecting their location.
Yeah.
That data is either dispersed or in the hands of the public sector or not. They just don't have the technical capacity to really understand what all those likelihoods and probabilities really mean for a building.
Yeah.
And so providing them with information whether that hazard exists there or not. And we look at it in a very binary way. It either exists or it doesn't exist. If it exists, you have to prepare for it, no matter what the probability or likelihood of that risk is. Just to give a specific example, let's say a return period of an earthquake event in that location is 200 years, but it can happen tomorrow as well. It's a probability. And so are you going to build a non-resilient building just because the earthquake of a significant degree may happen like 200 years from now? Or perhaps it could also happen tomorrow. Why risk it, right? So that to address that information asymmetry is part of our challenge.
Yeah.
But then the engineers are, of course, taught to follow the codes in the countries, but codes are usually just to save lives.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, like across the world, not every building code is on par with the actual disasters that are occurring. And especially with climate change, we're seeing more severe and more intense and more frequent disasters. So the codes are not able to catch up with,
or not enough.
Speeds, or not sufficient to protect not just the people, but the assets themselves. A big portion of the challenge is that oftentimes the code is the minimum to save lives, to get people out of the building, but then you lose the building. that it means an economic devastation, in the sense that it takes resources from cities, it takes resources from governments, it takes resources from individuals and businesses to recover and reconstruct. And if we're talking about sustainable development, we can't let that happen, because we need that resources to push further into the development goals that we have for those countries.
Interesting, absolutely interesting. No, I totally understand that. One of the question I have, I mean, I have a lot of questions, including on data, but we may talk about it later. But I want to focus 1 second on the building, and you mentioned, like, okay, it's twofold. It's the location vis-a-vis natural disaster related risk, but also the building itself. So building a sort of an assessment or where each building for developers or whoever where it stands at. I'm just thinking the value of this IFC building resilience work that you're doing as a tremendous, value, right, for developer, etc. So how does it work concretely? Like, I'm a developer, can I come to IFC and I ask for like a sort of a, I'm sorry to use that term, but like a quote for that, and like you do the report for me?
So actually you can do all the work yourself in a way, because if you go to resilienceindex.org, we have a freely available app where you can sign up as a user, and then have your account and start creating your project. For now, we're only have data for the Philippines, but we're gonna go global very soon. That's what our ambition is. And so practically what you do is you select the location of the building that you're designing or constructing, and then the app runs an sort of a algorithm to tell you what hazards are applicable there for that you need to address. And then you're introduced and provided with a list of mitigation measures. These are engineering and auditing related solutions that will help you to build a more resilient building. And we categorize them under 4 big categories: wind, water, fire, and geoseismic. But we also include operational continuity measures as well, because what we want, not just to save the building, but keep it operational post-disaster. And so with your answers to how much of those that you integrated to your building, you get what we call a resilience rating that ranges from R, C, B, A, and A+. So R is not up to code or like informal or old code type of building. C would be a weak or like barely meeting the requirements sort of standard that it will align with. B is a good code that goes up to a good code. A is international best practice. So we're talking about earthquake codes of Japan. We're talking about wind codes of Florida.
Yeah.
And then if A+ is in addition to being an A, you need to do operational continuity, which means you have like water supply, you have energy on site that would keep the building going, at least its core functions.
Interesting. So at the end, there's a bit of, for people to really understand in a simple way, there is some, with the rating, there is some similarities with the energy efficiency rating of houses when someone goes on a market and the owner provides like the rating of the energy efficiency. That's the same, but at a larger scale throughout different pillars of resilience. Is that correct?
That's true. I mean, fundamentally, what those labeling systems do is to communicate the value of efficiency across the market stakeholders. So now that I know, like, if I'm going to buy a white goods, whether I'm going to choose a B rating or an A rating, and what that would mean for my energy bill, it's similar. And in addition to that, we've also integrated costs of these measures into our system, so that from moving from a C-rated building to a B-rated building, a developer will be able to know how much extra it's going to cost them. And it's important to know that between that additional cost versus the loss you may sustain when you're at that lower rating is usually a big it should be a big deciding factor, because it's usually better to implement resilience measures before a disaster occurs than after it, when the building is already damaged. And it's an important factor even for like insurance and banks if they're loaning as well, because nobody wants to like invest in stranded assets after all.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out, because that was my next question on how it has an impact on all the stakeholders in the financing of those investments, right? Because it has an impact on insurance, it has impact on all the financing elements, all the different promoters that come into that element. But my question then, if I want to push a bit and try to understand how it has an impact then on subsequent project or investment. As you said, it's a rating. So it informs me, let's say I'm a developer, it informs me on the risk there or the rating of my building, etc. And then, okay, I can see the mitigation measure through your tool, I understand, online, etc. But what are the incentive for me to push that further, because a lot of our audience there are in engineering firms or consultancy, so they may be involved with those type of projects. So again, going back to me, I'm the developer in that case. I've seen your rating. I'm in a not very good rating. I'm not happy. I see those mitigation measure. What's the next step? Can I go back to IFC to get some support for financing of those additional mitigation measures to increase my rating and have a better project and convince my bank and my insurance to get a better deal, etc.? Is there any scheme to execute that improvement of my resilience rating and level?
So the resilience rating is sort of a self-assessment. So as a developer can improve upon seeing the measures laid out in front of them. So it's sort of a guideline of sorts to achieve better and better each time they build and design. As for how IFC is approaching it, similar to our Green Buildings Edge program, we're building the building resilience program in a four-pronged, what we call a four-pronged approach, which is, it's not only the tool that we're developing, but we also, as IFC, we're doing investments. So we invest in the market through financial institutions. We can invest directly to projects, or we can work with governmental stakeholders to improve codes and incentives in the market.
Okay.
For Building Resilience Index, we're of course at the very early stages. It's a project that's almost 2 years old, and we just launched the tool last December. But if I were to give an example from our Edge program, it had immense success in Colombia market, simply because that four-pronged approach worked. And because we have a tool that provided finance-linked green building assessment for the market that certifies buildings, then the government will put through a green building code that was supported with tax incentives. And then there was a bank and other financial institutions that provided green bonds and other financial tools. And then IFC was also able to invest directly to certain projects. The whole ecosystem was complete. And now in Colombia, 20% of all new buildings are built green.
Wow.
And this is within 4 years.
Wow. This is incredible. Wow.
So we're using those lessons learned, hoping to at least implement those lessons learned into the Building Resilience Index as well.
Yeah, this is, I mean, you nailed it. This is exactly what I wanted to know about the ecosystem, and how from data and an index that gives you sort of a stamp from IFC to say you are there, it gives a sort of a quality insurance. It trickles down throughout the entire chain to the point, because when you hear now with all those initiatives, net zero in the UK, green agenda in the EU or the World Bank, etc., I hear a lot of banks, private banks, different financial institutions, they all want to have a green agenda. So they're looking for opportunities like this one to then, finance some project, and developers come to them. They need to come to them with something that shows that there is a net zero effect, or even like, negative carbon effect, etc. So
Yeah.
this is the sort of initiative that, from a rating and good data has a massive impact. As you mentioned, Colombia, I didn't know those numbers. This is fascinating.
And if I may add another thing, and another key element of the whole program is a skills development and training program that we partnered with local chambers and engineering groups, because unless the higher education and continuous education in certain expertise is not like embedded within this ecosystem, we won't have enough people to work on green buildings, and that it needs to become intrinsic. It needs to become common practice to build green, to build resilience, and that could only be done through good skills and jobs training that we can provide.
No, that makes sense. This point of view, I haven't thought about it, but that makes sense, because you can't expect IFC to intervene everywhere. You need to build that capacity and that awareness. So going back then to that, and I want to take the Istanbul. I know you're calling today from Istanbul, right?
Yes.
How is that capacity and that awareness in Istanbul? I know there are a few Istanbul Vision, I think 2050. I don't know exactly if it's for a more inclusive Istanbul or more green Istanbul, but and I understand this program of yours is not limited to Istanbul or to Turkey, far from that. You mentioned Colombia, but how's that ecosystem in Turkey, which again, as a country that has a lot of opportunities and is changing a lot right now, but can you tell us a bit more about that skill set and how the awareness vis-a-vis resilience and green building is changing or not changing in Turkey and Istanbul?
That's sort of a pain point that you're mentioning, I guess. So I would say we in Istanbul and in Turkey in general, we may have be on the verge of missing a big opportunity, because 95% of the country is an earthquake zone, and with newer earthquake regulations and subsequent urban renewal projects that pretty much for the lack of a better word, like raised and reconstructed entire neighborhoods, sometimes as a holistic district, sometimes one by buildings. I think we sort of missed an opportunity to actually integrate climate hazards into the equation, as well as sustainability agenda.
Okay.
And this was simply because that sort of skills training and understanding across the construction sector and across public sector was not there. And we just created densities within the city that became unsustainable or posed greater risks for the infrastructure of the city when a climate hazard occurs. So it pains me a little bit. There's always, so like the current the municipality mayorship, they're working towards more resilience there. And I think the bigger portion of, because I was involved with the climate action plan for Istanbul in 2018, it was a big list of things that could be done in Istanbul by the experts in the city and across Turkey, to be honest. But currently what's happening is they actually have a Istanbul climate platform where we have everyone from youth to senior experts advising the municipality on how to improve certain progresses and strategies to be more inclusive and make sure that there's accountability and nothing gets missed out. And I'm on the climate adaptation and justice work group there. And I just love it because we have a high school student as our moderator. Nice. And so we have youth representation, we have expert representation, we have NGO representations. And I like it because it creates the diversity that we need to really guide resilience and sustainability agendas in the cities.
This is massive. I mean, I understand you say it's a pain point and a bottleneck, but it's also improvement, right? Because and with the inclusion of youth, you're building the next generation of decision maker and citizens in Turkey, and being more aware of those very important topics, not only for the country but for the entire world ecosystem. So very positive as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Cities have a lot to do because fundamentally, although the emissions are a big portion of the discussion, what it comes down to is the climate change impacts are felt at the local level.
Yeah.
So it's really up to the city governments and local stakeholders to figure out ways to address it.
Yeah, definitely. It echoes a lot, we had a session with a World Bank expert on urban planning, and we're talking about this urban-rural divide, and she was correlating poverty ratio, carbon footprint in cities, and showing that, yes, there are a relationship between rural and urban, but they had to focus a lot on the urban area because of emission and the impact of lifting those emissions towards reduction of poverty. So that very much echoes what you're saying, because again, your index, yes, it's the entire land for the mapping of the hazard. The building can be anywhere, but again, you see that concentration, and so the bulk of the effort, I guess, again, is the cities, policies, is cities that have to put in place those tax incentive and all the things you mentioned, because they are really the driver of that change and that transformation.
Absolutely. And to be honest, it's challenging for cities, and I've recently created a local authorities guideline for Turkey in a project with UNDP Turkey on enhancing adaptation action in Turkey. And the standard approach should be to actually first figure out what the climate hazards affecting a city is, and then cross-cutting it with the vulnerabilities of people, communities, sectors, and all sorts of spatial arrangements with distribution within the city, and then prioritize. Oftentimes, unfortunately, there are political, ideological discussions that fall under these decisions, and addressing climate justice within that framework may be a little tough. But we need to, before we go into the action plans, we need to understand holistically what the vulnerabilities of a city is. And then what we're doing at building scale is just one portion of it. Yeah. But of course, it's important, because unless we protect livelihoods and lives, we won't have anyone to work towards the resilience as well.
100%. Naz, thank you so much. Fascinating topic. I know we're gonna have another hour or more next time to continue that discussion. For the time being, this is the end of our session. Thank you so much again for being with us. That was fascinating, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.